I'll have to put it on that. Yeah, this is just some of the things that Allison had mentioned earlier. They asked us to put this together, but the real takeaway from this particular slide is that I've been in the startup world from just about every possible perspective. And I can say without fear of contradiction, this is by far the best way for early stage startups to get funding. And funding is your problem. Actually, it's a proxy for time. Time is really your problem, but the funding will give you the extra time that you can't get anywhere else. Okay, this is the usual military thing. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you, and then we're going to tell you what we told you. So, and then number 4, frequently asked questions. That might capture some of the offline stuff that you want to talk about. What is it? The SBIR program, and we use it interchangeably with STTR. We'll tell you what that is. But it's a government set-aside program for small businesses and startups. And Ralph's Garage Company can send in a proposal, and it could get funded. And we'll tell you about the relative amounts. It started in 1977, and NSF has been sort of the leader in advancing the next evolution, next kind of step of what they're going to be working on. Right now, 11 federal agencies participate in this program in some form or another, which is great. So here are the definitions: SBIR, Small Business Innovation, and as you can see, most of the awards are into this category. STTR is something usually involving a university. I will say that it's possible, but it's a very complicated, it adds an incredible measure of complication to the process because universities have their own set of rules. And now you're trying to meld a government set of rules with a university set of rules. And we'll go into some of the areas that usually pop up as a conflict. Any questions so far, Allison? All right, who can apply? You have to be a profit organization or for-profit. We get quite a few initial inquiries from nonprofits. It is not what that's for. Small business, not just a startup, but small businesses, ongoing, can apply. The principal investigator, that's the designated person, kind of the point person in the proposal, must be employed by the company. This is where a lot of university interaction has a conflict because typically professors don't want to drop below 50% to maintain their full-time status, their whatever tenure status, their benefits, and so forth. However, the SBIR requirement is the principal investigator must be employed 51% of the time. So the usual workaround is the professor becomes senior advisor and we designate someone else to be the principal investigator. That way everybody's happy. Must be US majority owned. And second, finally, VCs and so forth can have a position, but they cannot be the major stockholder in that. These are the 11 agencies that participate in SBIRs. The numbers in the parentheses indicate the number of departments within those agencies. For example, in defense, you've got Navy, Air Force, Army, Office of Naval Research. There's some cyber divisions and so forth. Health and Human Services, NIH. If you ever go onto the NIH website, you'll see a list of 30 different institutes. Diabetes, eye, all kinds of different things. And of course, the CDC. Energy and NSF. Those are the top 4 in award amounts. Then it drops off pretty quickly between throughout the remaining agencies. And this is kind of coming back at the same information the same way. This is the frequency of their award cycles. And if you look at the 1X, it's all the people that are at the bottom of the amount of awards given. Energy, DOD, NIH 3 times, and NSF is a rolling situation. It doesn't really matter when you submit, because if you miss it today, the deadline, tomorrow starts a new cycle. So we always counsel people, take the time to do it right. Don't feel that you have to be stampeded into some arbitrary deadline. This is really important, I think. This is what we call the innovation continuum. It says across the top, the bubbles are the various stages of development of a company's idea or product. And then at the bottom, we have the entities that are the most likely funders of that stage. When I got into this game 30 years ago, our group was totally funded by VCs. That would never happen today. VCs have all moved up. They want to help. They want to reduce the risk. That means they have to go and be very attuned to the commercialization, because VCs, more than any of this group, they're interested in only one thing: exits. When are we going to get our money? How are we all going to get rich here? So the closer you can get to commercialization makes you a much more attractive acquisition target or even an IPO. You can see early on, SBIRs are I think the most likely first step after you've gone through your friends, your family, your fools, your rich uncles, and so forth. That tends to top out at around 25,000, which is not a lot to get going. We'll go into the amounts of the SBIRs. You can see that it's a big jump to that next step. The prime agency awards are ones that are sort of follow on to your initial SBIR award. And then you get into this group, angels. Angels came about because of the gap between SBIRs and venture people. Angels typically like early stage deals with some type of commercial validation. And then up to like 5 or 10 million in revenue, then you start to see venture guys starting to sniff around there. But it's important to keep this in mind, because this is how the investment community looks at you. If you come with your idea today, yeah, maybe you'll get some venture guys. Highly unlikely. This is a much more certain path to follow. All right, why do you do this? Well, this builds off of that last graphic. Friends and family, limited. Banks, they're not going to touch a startup. They want 3 years of statements, ongoing. Angels, I'm a member of several angel groups, but when you take our money, you're going to get diluted. Your equity position is going to get diluted. Even worse, when you come back second and third time, you're going to get diluted. And we have certain verticals that we like, certain things. Other things we kind of run away from. Venture guys, they're very selective. They move to this mezzanine phase. SBA is a very good program for certain types of businesses to get started, but you have to have collateral. They want your house. Put your house up. And then microloans never get enough money. That gets a lot of publicity, but it doesn't get you anywhere for what you're doing. All right, now we're talking, how much are we talking about here? This is the NSF template for funding. Phase 1, proof of concept, $256,000. Phase 2, $1 million. Phase 2B, B is what they call the supplementary. It's a matching grant to whatever other money you can bring in from any other source, other investors, state funding. And so they will match $500,000 at 50% up to $1 million of other outside money. Okay. So the first 3 items, 1, 2, 2B, that's all free money in a sense. The B money raised on the outside, that's going to involve some type of equity stake from those people, most likely. However, if it's a state funding entity, it's very much like the SBIR program. It's a grant. So it's, people say, well, why should I do this? Where else are you going to get $2 million plus out of the box? NIH, these are the numbers for NIH. Same phase 1, and then they kick it up. Phase 2, 1.6. We had one client I was telling earlier that last spring they got 1.32 million. They were thrilled. That was wonderful. All right, we've talked about this several times. It's a grant, not a loan, and they're non-dilutive. And I can't stress that enough. People don't think beyond the first raise. And every time you go in, they're going to want a bigger piece of it. And pretty soon, you're just working at a job. You could have done this before and have a hell of a lot more security working for a company, a bigger company. So you want to do anything you can to avoid going to somebody that takes a piece of your company. That's what that 1.32 million did for our client. They were actually pitching to our angel group. And then one night they came in and said, we just got the money from NIH. We don't need you guys for now. I was thrilled. That was great for them. All right, how do you get started? Well, you got to remember, it's a government program. So there's a lot of paperwork going on. First of all, you have to incorporate, single member LLC is perfectly fine for this exercise. Get an EIN, DUNS. SAM is a federal registration website. You have to go to the SBA website. And then you go to the appropriate agency websites. And that's really a big step because they're all different. NSF has one called Fastlane, which is just a template. It's a good format to follow. It's a good platform. And then you start to look at the right domain. Where should you send this to your proposal? Okay on questions? Anything? They're all asleep or they don't care. Right? All right. This is a big distinguishing characteristics. NIH and NSF are open solicitations. By that I mean, once you decide where your domain should be, you define the problem. And then you say, okay, it belongs in the energy sector or whatever. Then you have to come up with a solution. All the other agencies, as far as we can tell, have already decided what problem they want solved. Say, well, the military would be an obvious choice. We want an invisible landing craft where we can drop a platoon at night, 25 guys. Well, you don't have to worry about finding a customer. It's already been defined. So that's one reason I like the NIH NSF. It's much broader latitude for your ideas. Right now, NSF has 13 domains. There's 2 slides that cover them all. These change regularly depending on actually the kinds of proposals that come in, solicitations. They tend to follow what's hot technically. Yeah, there it is, IoT, Internet of Things. That was a separate category. Then they had all these others that came in, so they lumped it in. Each one of these domains has a program director, and that's the key person. You should do whatever you can to establish a relationship with a program director. He would be, or she would be, your white knight through the process. Start by sending an email introducing yourself. Come up with a couple fluff questions just so you can establish a dialogue with this person. And gradually, as you come to a sticking point, or you're faced with, well, maybe a fork in the road for a certain strategy, we encourage you to contact the program director and say, what do you think about this? And this is a big change in the last 10 years over their process. These guys used to hide. Now they are accessible. They give you constructive criticism. And it's a very big step forward. Eliminates a lot of hassle. So some people say, well, how do I know if I'm ready? We'll get into that. In a phase 1, here's what we look at. Going back to my days as a reviewer. We want to know, you have to convince us that this hasn't already been done. Now, typically a panel will be made up of people who have been selected because they do have experience in your domain area. There's nothing worse than hearing somebody will say, well, this has been done by so-and-so 5 years ago. Proof of concept, do the critical experiment. It's a go, no-go thing. Realistic work scope. Some people think more is better. Not true. Everyone in that room has done research of some type at some time, and they know how long it takes. There's sometimes we get proposals, everyone just kind of, it's bad because everyone kind of looks up and somebody's afraid to be the first person to say, this is totally unrealistic. Then finally they'll do that, and then the waterfall hits and they lose. And qualified team and facilities. What we mean by that is we want to see a balanced team. And this is a real problem, particularly for those proposals coming out of university academia, which I don't consider this group to be, but I'm a professor. And he's going to have his other 3 professor friends on the team. Well, the real thrust of these programs is eventually for you to start a company, hire employees who will then pay taxes back into the system. That's the game. So if we don't think you have any chance of ever commercializing it, because your team is never going to get out of the lab, it's not going to go anywhere. So that's what we're talking about. And facilities is easily. If you don't have it, you can rent it or go somewhere else. That's usually not a killing point. We're frozen. Or not.
There we go.
Okay.
Do you want to go back?
No, this is fine. All right. When we evaluate it at NSF, 50% is on the technology, 50% is on the commercialization plan. So what's in the commercialization plan? Well, we want to see a business plan. You know, how do you think you're going to go forward? We don't usually judge that too harshly, other than we like to see a plan, you know, because we know it's very possible that you're going to pivot at some time when you realize what you're doing is not getting the traction you need. Potential customers. This is the big factor that we look at. And there is a section that requires what they call letters of support. And this indicates something to us that you have gone out and spoken to potential customers. And that helps you define and refine your product specifications, what the commercialization potential, what kind of pricing they'd be expecting to see. And the proof of that is what we call a letter of support. Very simple. On their letterhead, they say, we've met with Ralph Incorporated, and we think his concept would be valuable to our business strategy. And we urge NSF or whomever, NIH, to support this program. Now, you can elevate that. Some people have even gone to said, and we're willing to support it with support in kind. Other people said, we're going to give them a $25,000 development project or something like that to show that there's potential customer engagement. We'd like to see prior commercial experience in your team. That is primarily the individuals who are responsible for the commercialization. Ralph has worked on this, and he's brought 5 products to market, current sales, whatever, 50 million or something like that, just to show that you've been able to push the ball across the goal line at least once, and you know what it's all about. This is another thing that people miss. And I'll talk NSF simply because it's relevant to NIH too. High risk, high payback. They are looking for the 5-run homer, and we do not fund evolutionary of existing things. We have a phrase: incrementalism is fatal. If it's really not going to make that much difference, take a seat at the loser's table. It's not going to work. And combinations of existing technologies, unless there was a missing bridge between the two. And we've seen a couple of them come together saying, people have been trying to do this, but this was hung up because of this or that. And this is the link that will enable this to happen. That'll work too. All right. Who are these people, the masked men behind the curtain? Well, you're really writing this for 2 groups. The domain area program director, who gets the first crack. Now, and we'll go into the mechanism of how these things are reviewed and how program directors interact. And then the panel reviewers. Usually, so you have to kind of think like they think. The panelists, NSF and NIH use outside experts in these domains. Each of the program directors has got a stable of people they know. In my case, it was, well, Ralph knows advanced materials. So anything advanced materials, I got a call. Panels consist of 8 to 10. You're divided between technical and commercial expertise. Show there what the background is of these people. And one thing we always, most of the people will probably know what you're talking about, but don't be afraid to dumb it down for about 3 or 4 sentences to explain why this is a problem. So the way this works is prior to the meeting, we get abstracts sent to us, and we self-rate our perceived expertise in each one of those. And then based on that, we send it back to the program director and they say, okay. And they look for 2 technical and 2 commercial people to review each proposal on depth. And then we meet in Arlington, physically get together. We have done Zoom recently, but and then we'll just sit and rate them: excellent, very good, good, fair, poor. Nothing in the bottom 3 categories will get an award. And then we use the highly technical practice of using little Post-it notes on a line and say, okay, these proposals are excellent. You know, we just go down. And so, you know, we have 2 or 3 that are either excellent or very good. Very good has a good chance. Excellent usually gets funded, but they're not very many. I think 12 years I did, I only gave out 3 excellents. So, all right, this goes back to your question earlier about, you know, what do we want? And admittedly, a lot of this is my feeling, but I look for the overall story. You know, compelling stories are what moves me. I'll tell you what it does. It makes me read beyond page 1. That's really what it's about. Impress me. We want the big hit. There's that phrase again, incrementalism is fatal. Do a quick context of what's out there, why it doesn't satisfy in a solution for the problem. We do get a lot of nerds on these panels, and they will dive into your claims of what's out there and what is not out there. So be careful. And then we always look for differentiation elements. How is this different than what the other 5 solutions are? It may be a different approach, but why is this has a better chance of working, has better traction, et cetera. Well, in the phase 1s, we want the proof of concept, the critical, we've talked a little bit about this already. Clarity of proposal is very big on my list because my attitude is if they can't write, they don't know what they're talking about. So it always helps maybe just to have somebody review it from a grammatical standpoint, just a paragraph construction, the things you should have done in high school. And my favorite one, third-party letters of support. Much more difficult to secure than everyone thinks. In fact, there are times when we start with a client, we tell them to go out, that's the first thing you should be doing. And they say, oh no, we got to talk about the technology. You're not buying your own technology. Somebody else has to go out and buy it. And that's the letter of support. And I can tell you, 90% of the time, we're down to the last week. Well, he says he's going to do it for me, blah, blah, blah. And sometimes we wind up sending it in without the letters of support, and the review comes back and we get dinged on it. So I went through this already. We recommend these things, and the program directors make the final selections and kick it to the senior director at staff. In the years I was doing, only one time did I encounter where a program director went against the recommendations of the review panel. We said, no, market's too small. It was from some exotic thermal treatment furnace or whatever. The program director felt that this was an enabling technology that would allow certain research work to be done to make a leap into another area. And so he pushed it through. It's like, okay, it's your money, do it. But normally they follow what we recommend. All right, here we get into some of the usual questions. The DoD, number of awards, 2344, range of dollars shown there. And the selection rate for phase 1s was 19%, so 1 out of 5. You might think that's not compelling to do the work, but my answer is always the same. Where else are you going to get $256,000 for nothing? And that includes all the bad proposals. So I would, people said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, of the good proposals, I'd say half of them get funded. And the other half, they were missing something or they were light in certain areas compared to the others that happened to be in that review cohort. But look at what happens at the end. Phase two, 69%. Now, you might think that's a little reversed, but it should be between 1 and 2. But the point is, you've already shown the critical experiment for DoD, and they are the market. So you've convinced them that your approach works. And so the whole thing about commercialization doesn't really factor in. And if you can show you can deliver it, everything's good. We have one guy we work with down in Arizona who's, they love him. You know, as long as we put together a good proposal, we have about a 90% confidence that he's going to get funded because they know him. And that, you know, so you know, in this kind of business too. NIH, fiscal year 2020. Success rate 13.6. That does not surprise me at all. They are very, very tough on proposal review. And then, but a similar trend in the phase two, it gets a higher hit rate. NSF. Phase one proposal, 11%. That's come down, that's drifted down. And I think I was talking to Stephen? No. Stuart. And he actually remembered the talk I gave here, same talk a couple of years ago. And I was telling him that we've seen this drifting downward. I think because the reviewer, well, first of all, the overall quality of proposals has improved. So if you're getting more that meet the minimum, what do? You raise the standards of expectation. So I think that's what's going on here because the amount of money in the award pool is fixed. So, you know, that's, if you're getting more proposals, the math says the percentage award is going to go down. But look at the phase two numbers, same trend, much higher percentage of awards going out because you've done the hard work. You've shown that it's a good idea. And in your phase one award, you showed that there was a commercialization potential. So that's very big. What else we got? All right, is my idea worth it? They've all moved to, well, NSF, NIH have moved to this, send in a 3-page project pitch or summary to your PD. And if they believe it has merit, you'll be invited formally to submit a full proposal. This is a great step because it eliminates all the wasted effort of those that they know aren't going to make it. So this was a very good move they went to about 3-4 years ago. And if you don't understand their comment, call the guy up, email them, whatever, and they'll explain to you what's going on. Typically, it has to do with the fact that they've looked at 17 other programs in this domain, similar ideas, whatever. So they lack the differentiation element that we're looking for. All right, what's the downside? Well, it's a government program. And the phrase I like to use is compliance matters as much as the content of the proposal. So there's forms you have to fill out. You have to follow the government accounting rules in your budget process. There's certainly, and the websites I don't find particularly user-friendly. But they're constructed to satisfy certain requirements that are imposed on them by Congress. Nowhere does user-friendly enter into that exercise. It can take quite a while to do these things, do them right, particularly the admin portion. And then there's a delayed response. We tell clients, from the point you decide to start the process to the point you actually start to see money is 6 months. Sometimes it's 5, but we want to make sure they are planning appropriately, and it could easily be 6. And it's the way it is. You can't push them. And they don't respond to calls on this. When are we going to hear? When are we going to hear? All right, I get this all the time, particularly from someone that comes from primarily an academic or research perspective. The key element is validation of customer interest. You must approach potential customers and discuss your concept. Try to use the and they say, well, we don't know what it is. We don't know what they, use a hypothetical project. We're thinking of doing, well, first of all, you need to validate that what you think is a problem, they think is a problem. You know, There's nothing worse. And I first started doing consulting, I go in and I said, I do these things. And the guy said, I don't need any of that. The meeting's over in 30 seconds. So the idea is to get them talking about things, what keeps you up at night? What could you fix if you had unlimited resources? Those kinds of open questions. Then you can start to, and if you usually want to talk to their business development person or head techie, well, we need something that can operate in a temperature range up. Okay, there's your first spec element. And you keep talking about this. Finally, you say, okay, what do you think this is worth for you to pay? Well, this puts a lot of burden on them because they know if they lowball you, you're not going to go ahead with them anyway. So they don't win. So you gradually kind of work toward a number that you think you can live with, and they think that. That's why you really want to start talking to their business development people, because those guys, those people know exactly what the market price should be. And then start to put together what we call a conditional purchase order. If we met the spec sheet, which you just gave me, and this is the price, now you want to talk about how fast this thing could rocket upward. And this is where they're very reluctant because they don't have that decision capability to make this. So you want to say, well, who does? And you start talking to them. Why is this important? Because that becomes a figure you put in your revenue forecast cell for third quarter of 2022. And it's irrefutable. When we see those things, we know we can't challenge it. All the applicant has to say is, well, that's what the customer said. Well, there's no comeback to that as a reviewer. So we really like to see, and what we call it is a bottom-up approach. Many times we'll see, somebody will say, oh, we have this Frost & Sullivan market report, and it says the market's 2 billion, and we just want 1%. That's a deal killer right there. And the response is, your challenge is not the 1%. Your challenge is $1. We call it a bottom-up approach. Go talk to these clients and put together a timed presentation of how much and what they're willing to pay. Now you've got something that at least is a starting point for your whole business plan. All right, can a rejected proposal be resubmitted? Phase one, yes, we do a lot of submittals because when we review these things, we spend a lot of time on writing comments back. And the comments should be interpreted as, if you had answered these things, you would have had a much better chance of being awarded this amount. And we usually get a much higher return rate. And the program directors like to see people who listen. Phase two, no, you only get one shot on a phase two. But remember, the NSF percentage was pretty high on phase two. So people seem to be listening to this whole game. NIH, yes. Phase one resubmittal. Phase two, yes. The 1.35 award our client got was a phase two resubmittal. Why? Because they looked at the comments and that formed the basis of our revised proposal. It was a good idea too. All right, this one I like. A Shark Tank, an accurate depiction of the angel pitch process. Now we're moving on a little bit further, but there's certain elements that you should be aware of how people look at you. I watch it and I think it's fascinating. The valid elements to me are quick fire questions, investor focus on the problem solving aspects of an offering and the valuation squeeze they're going to go on. Listen to how fast they zero in on the problem solving mechanism of your proposal. That's how quick it is. Non-valid, every once in a while you get a superficial pitch. Rapid decisions by investors, no way, unless they're going to try to get it for nothing. That can take forever. And large stakes by one or two investors, not the typical end game that we see in this game, and it's certainly in the angel process. This is another area that we want, I think this is the last one. This is another area that I want you to consider, and that is state funding. There's kind of a mirror program in many states. Pennsylvania has an active one. This Ben Franklin Technology Partners has been around forever. And they are interested in funding good ideas, startups, businesses, and so forth. So, and a sidebar, money that you would get from any one of these can go back and count against your $1 million target for your 2B supplemental funding. So if you get 50 grand from Ben Franklin, NSF, no questions asked, just show us the documentation, 25 is yours. I was on a couple B, we like B proposals because we get paid the same amount of money and they take about 10 minutes. So boom. You know, it's a checklist. Here, yes, approved. Next, you know, it's great. And great for the applicant. Okay, I think that's the end of the formal slides. Any questions or?
Yes, hi, Ralph. This is Mike. Thank you for the.
Hi, Mike Chang. Yeah, hi.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for the presentation. That's very useful. One question regarding the internal application domain distribution. So you mentioned about 13 domain. Do you have like one more level of like detail you can share? Like what are the top domains that people apply for?
I don't have that information because that's confidential, but the only indication we see is when certain domains start to get combined with others. That tells me that the submission level for those domains is dropping. And when I first started, they actually had a category called advanced manufacturing, you know. Well, that's lumped in with 3 or 4 others now, simply because, you know, manufacturing is not what the country's about nowadays in many cases. So I don't really have the specific answer to that question.
Okay. And just kind of follow up to that is that if my product or my business actually cut across multiple domains of the 13, what's your recommendation in terms of how to pick the one?
The dynamics is that you pick where you think is best. And then what we suggest to our clients is you drop a note to that program director and saying, we believe it belongs here, but you know, if you guys think it belongs somewhere else, feel free to move it, because it doesn't affect your chances at all. They're all operating out of the same award pool. You know, the award pool is not designated by domains. It's the collective amount. So you don't have a problem switching around. And sometimes they'll say, no, I should stay here. This is all right, we'll know. And the only change I've really seen is sometimes in the medical area. There's a couple domains for NSF in medicine. They may say, you know, this might get better traction over at NIH. So we suggest they contact that and see if there's you know, someone over there who wants to champion that idea.
Okay, great. Thank
But
you.
I would stress, you know, don't be intimidated by these guys. They're much more approachable than they've ever been. Start with an email, right? How many people answer a phone call out of the box? 0. Start with the email. You'll get a response. They're pretty good. And then say, I'd like to schedule a conference call. Then you can get the access that you're looking for.
Okay, great.
Okay, someone else.
Thank you.
You mentioned principal investigator and research.
Yes.
What are the expectations in terms of research? What does research mean in this context? And what skills do you need to have on the team? I mean, why is it research?
Why is it research? Research to me is the work scope, what we call the work scope. You know, we want to see a step-by-step evaluation. Excuse us for a minute. Step-by-step evaluation of the actual tasks that you're going to do. We stress that each proposal have a minimum of 2 and a max of 4 of specific achievement objectives. I am very big on quantitative objectives. If all else, you know, how do you declare victory? There's nothing worse than saying, we're going to go into the lab and we're going to test these things. That's nothing more than a data collection exercise. You know, that's, you know, lab 1 here at Carnegie, right? We want to see, because you've been talking to clients, customers, the question is, well, if we solve this problem, you know, what metric do you guys use to decide if something is worth chasing? And they say, well, we want to see, no, give me a number. Boom. So that's where that kind of feedback comes in. You have an objective to reach, I don't know, 75% efficacy at this level of whatever. And then you have the tasks, that you're going to do.
So
for
so is the research question whether this is a viable business? Is that the research question?
I think that my way of reviewing it, that's more of a top down. Well, you have to be able to convince the reviewers that this is a problem worth chasing. Okay, building a better mousetrap doesn't do it. Now, and then the second part is the commercialization aspect is what really drives a lot of these choices at the end. And if we see a guy, a proposer come in and say, I've done 40 interviews, we have 10 people who are interested, which is always kind of a lukewarm term because it doesn't cost them anything to be interested. But I've got 4 letters of support, and actually one guy gave me a conditional purchase order. That is, if you do these things, we will buy X units at this price over the next 2 years. Well, it doesn't get any better than that from our perspective. And that's customer validation. I don't know, did I answer the question the way you wanted it?
I heard research and I was like, do I need to have research knowledge or, but it sounds like it's not necessarily that kind. It's not academic in nature. I'm not going to publish a paper at the end.
Okay.
And my principal investigator is that he needs to work in the company, or she. Do they need to? Can they come on board conditional getting the grant?
Yes. All of these personnel decisions, your team, they are all at time of award. So, we've approached this, and you can say that right in your write-up. Dr. So-and-so will be joining the team pending award notification. No problem. That's a good way to handle it. And the measurement of how much time and so forth is on an hourly basis. You're going to say the PI is going to spend X hours a month, figure what, 44 or 160 hours a month. He's going to spend 85 hours a month. We'll look at it and say, okay, they get it. They get it. He's going to work there. And if he can't, as we said about the academic constraints, that person should not be the PI. Find some other technical, and it does not have to be a doctor, PhD at all. But
I have a PhD that's waiting to jump ship, but we'll not do it if we can't pay them. So.
Yeah, no, until you get the money, he does not have to be identified as part of the team or on board, excuse me. Okay, here's somebody else. Matthew?
Yes, so I was wondering if you could speak to, given the length of time and the complexity of the applications and the process, I was wondering if you could speak to hiring, professional grant writers for assisting with this process.
That's what I do. I would strongly recommend you do that with someone, simply because they, know how to move this along. The administrative time can suck up infinite number of hours simply because you have to relearn and unlearn everything you know, because it's not the government way of doing things. And so I would strongly urge you to do that. If you want to talk to me offline about that, fine. I'd even give you some names of other people who do it. We all have a little bit different spin. We all try to differentiate ourselves somehow, but I strongly recommend it because it's just, I'll tell you what happens. It's one of these things, as you know, it's easy to put off if you have a real job now. And so pretty soon this happens all the time. Well, I don't think I want to spend the money. And then about a week and a half before the deadline, they call and they say, okay, I'm ready to go. Well, we tell them we want 4 weeks. And it's not because of that. It's just we know they're not going to respond every time we send them a draft, right? And it's easy to put off. It's life. Things don't, it's not their only purpose during this period. So figure a minimum of 4 weeks. If you've never done it, figure 8, because you're going to have to learn a lot of stuff. And it is not easy to learn because these website instructions are brutal. So if you're interviewing people, you want to know how many they've done, how many proposals they've done for that particular agency. You can ask them, what's your hit rate individually? That's not, I mean, they can give you a number, but it doesn't mean anything. There's so many variables that affect that. And, but yeah, and if you want to talk about that offline later, please, we'll do it. It looks like we got another one there. Or not. Maybe not. Okay. So the question is, can these SBIR awards be combined with awards from other entities, right? Money from other entities. I'm not really sure practically what that means. By that, I mean, to me, the SBIR money is dedicated to the work that you proposed in your work scope. Okay. Now, typically money from VCs or angels or whatever frequently goes toward marketing, and marketing, that is getting, boots on the ground, get out there talking to people, doing, we have one guy trying to do a new template for ordering foods through wholesalers and so forth. Well, that's something he's got to go out and constantly meet with each individual store director or chain director of that thing. There's expenses, there's plane tickets, there's hotels, there's all, typically that, and when we hear that, and we always ask them, where's the money going to go? That's one of the things that shows up, and then one of the things we immediately accept as being legitimate. So I'm not really sure if that answers, I don't know what they mean by combined. I guess that's what I mean, you don't want to be commingling funds. Let's make that very clear. That's a no-no, because feds can come back and will audit your books on this project. So if they sense that, that's not a good thing.
Yeah, that was my question. I think I can elaborate. I was just curious if applying for these funds does not exclude you from seeking other kind of financial support from other entities. But I think it seems that the answer is no, that as long as you do it in a legitimate way and you use the funds the way you said you would use, you can still apply for other sources of funding. And
we encourage that.
yeah.
We encourage that. It's kind of a broad blanket targeting thing. A neat question is that, can I submit the same idea to multiple agencies, right? Frequently, like I talked about the medical domain at NSF and then the NIH institutes. We encourage that. However, you can only accept one award. If two of them come through, you have to make a choice. Only one.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay. Anything else? Yeah.
Just a quickie. You talked about the customer validation a little bit, but between like having, say, different points of view, like you have a wait list of people who have signed up online versus interviews with actual the customer's feedback to other forms of validation. You mentioned like interviews and interested. What would you say is the best form of customer validation? Would you say it's the conditional purchase orders?
Okay, the question was asked was, what's the best form of customer validation? Yeah. I do a talk about that specifically, and different levels of increasing compelling stories. And the 3-4 line letters, the entry level, the best is, as I said, somebody that's going to say that this supplements our strategic plan, it would be a key element and so forth. What you're looking for is increasing levels of potential customer engagement, okay? Now, the plain vanilla 4-line letter satisfies the requirement of a letter of support, okay? Now, if you can get those other things, I'm very sensitive to letters of support because I've had to get them and I've had to sell customers, and when somebody's just telling you what you want to hear and whether or not they're serious. So I'm always looking for, how do we, You know, the question would be, if you had the product tomorrow, would you go able and talk to him and get an order? Or, you know, a commitment of some type. I mean, that's where you want to get to eventually. Now, the point is that takes a long time because most of these products are what we call a relationship sales cycle. You build a relationship over time. This is not something they're going to pick up at the checkout counter at the grocery store, most likely. I mean, we do see some consumer packaged good ideas, but it takes a long time. So I worked with one over the summer, and the guy was in my town, and I was working with him to try to get a letter of support from him. It's a local water company. And it took me 4 or 5 visits with the guy before, because he was worried about, well, am I committing the authority, the water authority to this, you know, and I'm going to get raked over the coals by the town solicitors and all that stuff. Finally, we came up with an explanation that he could live with, but it takes a lot of time. And that's why we tell people to start doing this right away. Simply just sit down and say, come up with a list of people right now, today. Okay. You're going to have to do it sooner or later. So why not get started? Does that answer your question? Okay, thanks. Yeah, one in the back. Just in time to think about an answer. Okay, the question was, does any of this advice change for a phase 2 resubmission or just a phase 2? Phase 2. Our experience is phase 2 is much more detailed. I mean, it's a thicker pack to start with. There's more narrative, there's more justification, and this is where they really zero in on customer validation. So I would emphasize that, but I would make sure that your research phase 1, going back to you answered the objectives in your work scope, and you have a quantification of what constitutes a viable product. You really want to stay away from a data generation exercise. You know, our customers told us that they won't go anywhere unless we can show 75% efficacy and what other metric they choose. But it's got to be that. That's much more compelling. What's it tell us? It tells us you've gotten beyond the first lunch, you know, with them, and now you're talking hard fact, right? So that'd be my only thing. It's a much more. Reviewers at times, I think, tend to be much more picayune too. In phase 2, they're picking little arbitrary. Suddenly you get into that crossover phase where they're not looking for reasons to accept it. They're looking for reasons to reject it. You know, and you got to try to anticipate that coming up and head that off. Just best way to handle that is to acknowledge this. You know, we realize somebody might think of this. Put a stake in it right away. All right. Well, it looks like we've exhausted the interest.
I have another question.
Oh, I'm sorry. This
Yes.
is Mike again. Okay, Mike,
That's
speak to
right.
me.
Yeah, so regarding the application, you mentioned that in the phase NSF phase 1,
Yeah,
based on some number you gave us, that I figured there's about 3,000 to 4,000 application.
Yeah.
So actually, each one actually get a kind of detailed feedback from the reviewers.
absolutely. The way this works is, like I said, there's 6 or 8 of us in the room, 4 techies, 4 commercial development guys like me. 2 of them on each group have been assigned the in-depth due diligence. They present it to the group. Then we do a straw poll very quickly as to whether or not we want to go. But after lunch, then we take each proposal apart again and write the specific reasons why we accepted it and the weaknesses. And that becomes part of the public record for that proposal. And we try to write a very airtight explanation, because clients can come back and start challenging the program director about this thing. So we have to basically give the program director ammunition to defend what the group decision was, which of course would normally have been rejection. That's why they're following up. But we really write that with the idea that if they had handled this properly, we kind of like the idea, you know, and what we're saying is we answer these questions and we are encouraging a resubmission, what we're doing. So the information is extremely detailed.
So can you share like what are kind of top 2 or 3 reasons that you know that you see common problems among the applications?
Well, yeah, sure. I think lack of compelling commercialization research is probably the #1 reason. And there are many times we think, my God, if this is such a great idea, why are they so worried about going out and talking to people about it? You know, we sit there, we try to get in their mind about why they're deferring that. The second one, particularly from proposals coming out of academia, is the team is not very balanced. As I mentioned earlier, it's heavily technical. Now, you can fill these gaps with consultants. They don't even have to be future planned employees. You know, so typically, you know, so lots of people, they're retired people, they're looking for something to do, they have expertise, and you start networking, and you find out, well, this is the guy you want to talk to, and so forth. And they can become your consultant to fill a particular gap. And so that's usually how that's handled if you don't want to hire somebody.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah.
There's a way around it.
Okay, thank you so much.
Martina, another one?
I'm also curious if you can think of any drawbacks or disadvantages of getting this kind of government funding.
No.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, the answer really is compared to what, you know? You remember that timeline about different investors and so forth. Having been in this situation of having to get more money and realizing you can't re-up at your pro rata share, so you're going to get diluted. And, you know, that just takes a lot of the drive out of your whole project, you know, for me. And I think that I really try to be objective about it. And I've gone through every one of those other possibilities, entities that I listed there, SBA, venture guys, so forth. This is by far, you know, the downside is it takes a long time. It's not, but I can guarantee you, talking to venture guys or angels, that will take a similarly long time to get the actual check. So,
Great, thank you so
the
much.
answer is compared to what? Except the rich uncle.
Hey Ralph, I had a
Yeah,
question as well.
yeah. What's up?
My name is Gaurav with Touchwood Labs.
Yes.
First of all, I want to thank you for your presentation. Really informative and very helpful for us. My question was stemmed around, so at Touchwood, we've built a proof of concept, as Matthew my co-founder might have shown you. We're looking to do essentially right now utilizing some off-the-shelf components, and we're going to be looking to make some electronic hardware developments that will be proprietary. So could we apply for any of these funds and potentially use that money and hand that over to a product development agency, so to speak, to develop that product for
Yeah,
us?
that's done. You know, you would classify this as this part of the work scope is going to be contracted out to Ralph's workshop, and we have a budget number for that. Here's his quote. Excuse me.
Okay.
And that's perfectly acceptable. But we need the quote to validate.
Okay, so it has to be based
putting in
off
your
of an
budget.
existing
A budgeted
statement.
item, and we need the quote from the outside source. That's acceptable.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much.
Because we know you really don't want to spend your money buying all this equipment. You don't want to spend it building a building. You know, these are the things. And so let's make sure your money goes to, in that case, you're kind of managing the outside contractor as well as running your marketing and customer validation efforts and stuff. So put the money where you take care of the major things, and there's a workaround for everything else.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ralph.
Good. Oh, we're back. We're on the floor.
On the note of advisors, I have a question. As I'm working on an SBIR grant currently, and I'm a solo person applying, so I don't have at least I'm putting together advisory for it.
Yes.
And on that note, I was curious, when pitching the advisory board in the application, how much specificity would you recommend, or any general advice on how to portray like the image of the relationship, or like how often interacting?
We usually, the question was, you've got a solo effort going, right? And you want to put together an advisory board, which is done quite often. We like that idea. You know, let's get some gray hairs in this thing. And how often should you interact with them, or how often should you describe your level of interaction with them? Is that kind of what you're asking? Yeah.
Like, what should the relationship look like for this?
Well, you know, it's kind of an ad hoc thing. It's as required. We don't say, well, you know, we want you to meet 20 hours a week with these guys or whatever. The important thing is that you assemble your real team, that is you, any consultants and your advisory board, with the idea that you're filling particular functional area gaps, right? For example, we get a lot of pharmaceutical projects coming through. I want to see somebody primarily from big pharma who has gone through the IND process and taken care of all this through, you know, approval, through FDA approval. 3 to 5 years. That's going to take that long for that kind of an effort. I want to see somebody on the board, your advisory board, or even part of your consulting team, who knows how to do that, assuming the principal investigator or president or whomever doesn't know how to do it. So that's what I look for.
So people with experience on the full delivery of what.
Well, for the commercials, if that's the gap,
Right.
you know, if that's your area of expertise, then you don't need it. But think about what functional areas have to be addressed. Technology, you can go from theory to execution, right? Practical aspect. Marketing geeks are okay, but I like to see somebody from what I'd call the sales end that's actually had to close on a deal. Very different than just saying, well, the marketing elements line up, it's a slam dunk. You know, it's a build it and they will come. That doesn't go anywhere with us either. Legal, you can farm that out. You should address any patent protection. It's okay if you decide you want to keep it as know-how and not patent it. I don't care about that because I've been on both sides. Investors, angels, and VCs seem to like patent coverage better, more important. They put a greater premium on it, certainly if it's a drug or something like that. Other things that, certainly if it's a marketing play, I don't care, you know. What else do we have? Marketing, and then some financial person. Knows either how to raise money, or just to track your money. Now, once again, that usually gets farmed out to an accounting firm and so forth. But it would help if you have somebody on your team that has some understanding of the kind of financial transaction information that should be captured and tracked, that they can give to the accountant.
Would it be appropriate to say, like, whenever you paint the picture of your team, once you perceive it, right?
Yeah, the team must be in place at time of funding.
Right. Would you be able to say, for like the accounting aspect, I'll have an accounting person come in once the funding has arrived to paint a picture of that, build out?
Yeah. We usually just say financial accounting will be taken care of by, and give the name of the firm, because that tells us you've gone out and looked for somebody. And just say that who handles 5 other startups, or something, you know, something to say this person knows this space very well. He was following up on the question about how do you go about getting an appropriate accounting entity, and that's what my answer was for. So, but there's ways to work through that. It's you know, the major problem that trips up a lot of people is this the PI has to be an employee of 50%. Because a lot of these guys are doing these jobs on the side and they don't want to give up their current gravy train, whether it be a tenured position or a C-level job at a corporation, and this is their exit plan for retirement or something like that. You know, that gets highlighted very quickly. And that's a reason for rejection if they're not compliant with that. How are we doing here? I see a lot of mutes. You got anything? Okay, we're going to shut it down. Now you've got my email on that first slide. Feel free to contact me.